Please welcome this morning Mr. Kurt Neddenriep. He is the Vice President and Wealth Advisor at Morgan Stanley, located in Elko, Nevada, with a second office and home in Reno, Nevada. He joined Morgan Stanley in January of 1996, and over the last 20 years, he built a team that provides comprehensive financial services to both affluent and high net worth families. As the founding member of the Mountain West Group at Morgan Stanley, he focuses on individual client consulting and investment management. A lifelong Nevadan, he is a graduate of Bishop Manogue Catholic High School and earned a Bachelor's of Science degree in Business Administration with a major in finance and a minor in economics from the University of Nevada, Reno in 1994. He completed the Morgan Stanley Senior Investments Consultants Program at the Wharton School of Business in 2006 and is a Certified Investment Management Analyst charter holder with the Investment Management Consultants Association. He actively participates in his community, serving as both a member and past president of the Rotary Club of Elko, a member of the board emeritus and past president of the Boys and Girls Club of Elko, and is a Paul Harris Fellow with Rotary International. He's also a board member with the Nevada Military Sport Alliance. He also has served multiple terms on the boards of Great Basin College Foundation and the Elko Chamber of Commerce. In addition to his wealth advisory practice at Morgan Stanley, he is a retired Nevada Army National Guard Lieutenant Colonel. Most recently, he was assigned as the commander of the 221st Armored Reconnaissance Squadron. He enlisted in the National Guard in February of 1990 and was commissioned a second lieutenant of armor upon completion of the University of Nevada Reno ROTC program in May of 1994. He served as the executive officer of the 221st Armored Reconnaissance Squadron during their mobilization to Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom in 2009 to 2010. His decorations include the Bronze Star, the Meritorious Service Medal, the Army Commendation Medal, and the Army Combat Badge. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Kurt Neddenriep.
Thanks, Donald. Really appreciate that. And thank you all. It's an honor to be here and speak to you. When Donald called and asked me to come and speak at this event, we talked about what should I talk about. And he gave me a few things. And he said, hey, how about a brief bio? Well, that wasn't brief, but thank you. I appreciate that. Talk about your path to service. I'm going to do a little bit of that today. And then I want you to talk about Combat Finance, which is a book I wrote. And I'll talk about why I wrote that and the things that are in that. And then I've got a couple of closing thoughts that I just think will be good for us, veteran to veteran. So a couple of things I want to add to that brief bio, though, because they're important to me, and that is I've been married to my wife, Katie, for 18 years. Well, this June will be 18 years. I had to import her. She was a James Madison University graduate she grew up in Virginia. And we actually met when I was a valet parker at Jonasquagas Nugget, helping pay my way through school. She was standing by the luggage, and I kept running back and forth. And SOP was you talk to the cute ones, right? So I was chatting with her, and her mom was in town for a convention. Her dad was gambling all week, so the guys would rib me and say, hey, your girlfriend's back, because she kept coming down to see this guy who had chatted her up. So it worked out, though. 18 years later, we're married, and we now have a 2-year-old. Our little son, Luke, turns 2 years old this month on March 22nd. And I know Eaton Dunkelberg told you, Donald, to give me a bad time about my age, so you guys can do the math. I'll be 63 when he graduates high school, and he is my first child, so I kind of did things a little bit backwards there, but it's keeping me young, and certainly the best part of my life. And that's part of what I'm going to talk about here a little bit, too. So, path to service. As Donald said, I did join the National Guard in 1990, and I wish I could say it was because I just had this burning desire to serve, and that was in my blood, and all my family members have always served. But here's the reality. At Manogue, I was a cross-country and track runner. I also played basketball, but just barely. But cross-country and track, I was quite good. I ran a 9:52 mile and a 4:20 mile, and did really well. At Manogue at that time was AA. So I got a scholarship to go up and run for UNR, cross-country and track. Ran the cross-country season, and you may or may not know this, but in high school, men's cross-country is a 5K, and UNR, at college, it's a 10K. Making that transition just didn't work. So I pretty much had a stellar career of being the seventh man on a seven-man team every single race at UNR, and realized I wasn't going to get my scholarship back, and so I was looking for ways to pay for school. Dad had a heart attack my junior year in high school. So I got this postcard in the mail and was talking about all the exciting things you could do in the military. And so I started looking into that, and going after active duty would have meant postponing school. So a friend had told me about the Guard, and that's what got me into the Guard. So I enlisted. I was 11 Bravo infantry out in Yarrington, mechanized infantry at the time. From the time I enlisted to the time I got my commission, the unit itself transitioned to armor. So I have a unique experience of having been the newest FNG private of a unit, going through it all the way up to commanding that same unit as a lieutenant colonel. So I will tell you, from that experience, my advice is this: be good to everybody, because that person that you were not good to when you were 19 now is maybe your command sergeant major, part of your command team when you're 42 years old or whatever. So, but it was a great experience, and I can't thank enough all the people in 221 Cav, the Wild Horse Squadron, that helped develop me as a young person and hopefully as a leader over those years. So that was really my path to military service. So, again, like I said, I wish it was much more something like they'd make movies about, that just this great desire to serve, but that was it. But while I was at basic training in 1990, that's when the Gulf War broke out. And that's when it became real to me, because as drill sergeants love to do, they came around and told us we were all getting shipped straight over, and of course they focused in on all the Guard guys. You thought you were going back to school, you're going over to Iraq and etc. And fun things they liked to do back in 1990. I hear things have changed a little bit, but that's the way they did it then. And so it became very real, and that's when it was actually a good time in my career to have that happen, because it really changed my focus from, hey, this is just something I'm doing, to this is something that really has meaning, and that if I'm going to do this, I want to try to excel and be the best that I can. That's what led me to then do the scholarship for ROTC, get a commission, and then carry on in that. So it really was, I feel, a good process in the end. So in terms of service, prior to deploying in 2009 and 2010, as Donald said on my resume, I did a lot of things to try to build my career over the years. And the things that are on my resume, I don't want to knock those. I think that, and I'll talk about it a little bit when I talk about combat finance, the things that we do to get degrees, to serve our community, to get our name out there, things that'll help us succeed in business, things that'll check a block on a resume to get a better job. Those things are good. They're part of the intellectual capital that helps make us valuable to others. It's part of the networking that we do to get ourselves ahead. But I have to tell you, there was a dramatic change in what service means to me when I went to Afghanistan. And I know we have a room full of veterans here, so I think you can relate. And if I start going into some things that are a little bit too much of a downer, there is a point that I'm going to make at the end of this. So when I was in Afghanistan, I was the second in command, the executive officer. And as you probably all know, the executive officer basically tries to handle everything that keeps the commander's mind free to focus on the fight. And so the S3 falls under the commander operations, but the logistics, personnel, everything else falls under the XO. Unfortunately for us, it was a tough fight. We were over in Logman Province, Afghanistan. During the time we were there, we had 60 Purple Hearts, 26 IED attacks, multiple direct fire contacts, multiple indirect fire contacts. We didn't lose any of our Nevada soldiers, but we were the battle space owners for Logman Province, a little bit unusual for a Guard unit, but we were the battle space owners, had 27 other military entities military and State Department entities working with us. But we lost 4 of the folks that were serving with us. And the difficult part for me was I had to oversee all the 15-6 reports. And so if you're familiar with those, anytime you have loss of equipment, loss of personnel, all of those things, a 15-6 is done to document the incident. So you can imagine with 26 IED hits and all the other direct fire issues, as the executive officer, even though I signed up a rotation of all my junior officers, and so that not everybody was having to work on 15-6s the whole time, but as the executive officer, I had to oversee those. I also had to, or I guess I should say, I really had the honor of escorting all of our honor flights back to Bagram. So when you're reviewing those reports over and over again, and you're seeing your men, your service members getting hit over and over again, and having to review every picture, every line of those reports, it can really wear on you. And I know that as veterans, everybody who served overseas has moments like that. There's things that just sear into your mind. On 25 October 2009, we lost Specialist Brandon Steffi and his working dog Macy in one of those blasts. And of course, I escorted their remains to Bagram for their honor flight. And I can remember every single thing about that helicopter ride. I can remember grabbing the bag out of the aircraft and taking it over to the personnel that handled that. And my point with this is that in terms of path to service, it really makes you, when you come back, realize what kind of world you want for each other, for our kids, for our society. And that was a turning point in my life in terms of what service means. And so when I got back, there was a really great guy. He just recently left Morgan Stanley, but his name is Randy Woldberg, and he's a Vietnam vet. And he grabbed me and pulled me aside before anyone else could really grab me in the office, and he goes, hey, I know you went through things. I can't try to tell you that I know what your experience has been, because everyone's is different. He goes, I went through some tough things too, and he said, I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but I'm going to give you some advice. He said, remember the good things. He goes, everybody's got some tough things that they saw and that they did when they were over there. But there's also a lot of really great things, and you can choose what you focus on. And that doesn't mean you want to diminish. I'll never forget Brandon Steffi. I'll never forget Macy and the others. I'll never forget the sacrifices that our soldiers have made. But I can choose to spend my time focusing on the positive things. And so I want to share a couple of those with you, because they're the things that I look back and just laugh about now. But we were in Camp Atterbury doing our pre-mob training. And you got to remember, we have 750 soldiers all getting ready for this combat mission. And ours was a dual mission. We were battle space owners of Lagman Province, but we also had to provide security force platoons for all 13 of the PRT teams, the provincial reconstruction teams that were out there in Afghanistan. So we knew guys were going to be outside the wire a lot, protecting those teams as they went out to rebuild schools and all those kinds of things. So very tense. We're trying to get everybody over there. You're trying to do all your Army, I think it was like 48-12-5 or something. It was all the things you had to check off before you could go over there. 2 nights before, we're all getting on the plane to fly out. And we're having this big staff meeting, all the NCOs and everybody getting all the last minute things. And all of a sudden, this guy in a pink monkey suit comes just running full speed around the corner of one of the barracks, does a beeline across the field and disappears behind another, one of the huts. And it was like this impulse simultaneously, like half of the E5s and E6s all just started chasing him. So you got this pink monkey running at full speed, and like 20 dudes all chasing him like this, and then disappear around the corner. And myself, the commander, the other officers, and senior leadership all kind of looking at each other. And we all kind of look at the commander, because he's either going to get really ticked about this, or it's extremely hilarious, which is what we thought. And he just started busting up. And I've used that story a lot in the future, because, sometimes it takes somebody to be our pink monkey, to take a really stressful situation and just have the courage and the humor to just say, okay, yeah, we know we're going into something really serious like this, but let's lighten that load, and let's make it something that we remember, 10 years later. And so I remember the pink monkey story, and of course I do remember the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders coming to our fob. That was great. And I remember there were 2 guys with these 2 Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders, and of course the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders are getting all the attention. And there were 2 guys on that were with them, and I go up to one of them, I'm like, I gotta apologize, I don't know who you are. And he goes, well, I'm in a soap opera, but he goes, you probably don't know me from that. And he told me the name of the soap opera, I didn't even know it existed. He goes, but you know what you probably do remember me from? He goes, you ever see Super Troopers? And I lit up, and I'm like, yeah, I've seen Super Troopers. He goes, I'm the one that got in a fight with Farva over the Leader Cola. So I'm like, yes! You're awesome. So he's Leader Cola guy. So I remember Pink Monkey and Leader Cola guy. And so I guess my point with that is we've all got to remember the good things. And while we certainly, I think it's healthy to acknowledge the other things that have happened and use those, if we can use that as a path to serve and as an influencer in our lives, I think that's great. But at the end of the day, let's remember the pink monkeys, and let's remember Leader Cola and the equivalent in your deployments in your lives. So, combat finance. You did ask me to speak about that, so I will. So while we were over in Afghanistan, there was our S2, Doug Seymour. In fact, I just saw on Facebook he just retired out of the military. Great guy, is a police officer with Las Vegas Metro. And big dude, about 6'3", outweighs me by about 100 pounds. And throughout remember 2009, 2010 when we were over there, financial crisis was in full swing. And because I'd been a financial advisor most of the career during the time that most of these guys got to know me, they would ask me a lot of financial questions, and especially during that downturn. And so, as you know, the commander's never late. So we would always have to get to our nightly bubs about 5 minutes before they started, because commander, if he walked in 3 minutes early, well, that's start time. So, but if we walked in 5 minutes late, that's also start time. So we always had some time to kill, and that's when everyone would ask me these finance questions. And finally one day, Captain Seymour, now Major Seymour, said, "Sir, you ought to write a book and call it Combat Finance." And I thought, that's actually a pretty good idea. So when I retired from the Guard in 2013, I decided, before I do other things, I'm going to go ahead and just write this book, Combat Finance. And the purpose of it was to provide financial literacy to veterans and their families. Because what I found during my time of service is that the folks that I served with really seemed to struggle with finances. And so I thought, if I can break down some basics, put it in some language that maybe veterans can understand, that hopefully it'll have an impact. And I created a 501c3 that I thought, gosh, I'll roll the profits into that, and that'll help sustain the financial literacy programs going forward. The book was fairly successful. It sold about 5,000 copies, but not enough to fund the 501c3 and keep it going. But let me just talk to you about the key learning points in that book, because I think they are very valid and they apply to everyone, veteran and non. And I'm going to start by telling a story that's in the book, and it's called I call it the ditch digger story. And the ditch digger story is this. This young man or young woman graduates high school, has no skills, comes out of high school and says, you know what, parents kick them out of the house, they've got to start earning a living. So they're going around trying to find something to do, and finally there's a construction company, and they say, hey, we need to have this ditch dug for a new sewer pipe, but I don't know how effective you are, so I'm going to pay you by the piece. For every yard of ditch you dig, I'll give you $20. So they start out and they're looking around, they don't have any tools, no nothing, so gumptious young person, they start digging with their hands. So after the first day, digging with their hands, no resources, they dig 1 yard of ditch, cubic yard of ditch. So they get paid $20. Now, if that person goes and spends that $20, they have to come back the next day, dig with their hands again, and perhaps they can get another yard of ditch dug. Well, what if they can find a way to live on $10 and take that other $10 and go down to Lowe's and buy a shovel? So the next day they show up, and now maybe they can dig 5 cubic yards of ditch. So now they've earned $100. And they say, great, I was living on $10, I'm going to increase my standard of living, I'm going to maybe live on $20 or $30 now, feels really great after you've been making 10. And I'm going to take the rest, I'm going to save it, and then a couple of months later they go and they buy a backhoe. Now how much ditch can they dig? So now they're getting paid much more because they're applying their labor with that physical capital, and they're becoming more productive. And if they continue to do that as time goes on, then they have their own construction company, crews working for them, and is that application of both our labor and our physical capital that increases that productivity, both as an overall economy and for us as individuals. And so what I talk about in Combat Finance is that we want to find ways of making sure that we set aside that capital, and also that we look at other forms of capital. And one of the other forms of capital is, of course, investing in ourselves and in our education. One of the examples I use in the book is that if we are a typist, and I know there's not a lot of folks that are typists anymore, but let's go with it. You can get paid so much to type a memo, correct? And maybe they're going to pay you $15 an hour to type a memo. But what if you apply a law degree and now you can actually write a contract? Are we not going to pay a much different wage for that knowledge, that experience that goes into being able to actually write a contract, not just actually put the words on screen? So when we have the knowledge and the intellect to create and to produce things such as law, we also increase our value. So the principles that I talk about in Combat Finance, and there's 10 of them, are all about making sure that we find ways to set money aside so we can buy physical capital, money aside so that we have financial capital like stocks, bonds, and things that grow while we're not actually having to physically work on them, and also increasing our intellectual capital and being the best that we can be at our business, which is why I love this organization, because this seems to be all about networking and learning from each other and finding ways to improve our businesses and our careers and so forth. So with that, let me talk quickly about the 10 principles, and then I'll just open it up for questions. So the 10 principles that are in the book is it's the last chapter, but really the thing that we need to focus on is, what are we fighting for? What do we want out of our lives? What do we want out of our future for our families and so forth? Because if we don't know that, what I find as an advisor is it's very easy to get distracted by the shiny objects. And I see that in business as well. If we have a laser focus, and if you look at leaders that have built great companies, Apple and Google and so forth, they generally speaking, at least initially, have a very good focus that keeps them driving towards what they're trying to achieve. So if we know what we're fighting for, and there's a book out recently, Start With Why, same concept. It helps keeps us focused, and so that we don't drift into things that really actually don't support our why. We need to build and maintain reserves. So many times, I would say 90% of the times when my soldiers were having financial difficulties, it would sound something like, well, I was doing fine, sir, and then I had a blowout on the freeway and a flat tire and whatnot. And I would start talking to them, and granted, that's an event that they weren't expecting, but they actually had no savings, no reserve. And so what I talk about in the book is that what military commander would willingly go into a fight without a reserve? Because we know that militarily a reserve either exploits success if the fight is going our way. We can use that to go and flank the enemy. It can also help extract us out of a bad situation. The fight is not going well, we're pinned down, we can use that reserve to get ourselves out and preserve ourselves for the next fight. Well, savings and investment reserves are the same way. So, before we decide to pay for Netflix, before we decide to do any of the wants in our lives, we need to make sure that we have certain reserves. And I talk about that, what types and how much is appropriate in the book. I talk about choosing our housing wisely. So many, especially before the downturn, so many people, the minute they could afford it, they do a bigger home, interest only, really get themselves into a situation where, yeah, you have this really nice house, but you have no ability to continue to fight the financial fight outside the wire. And so I use the analogy of a fob over in Afghanistan. And if we spent all of our time building this absolutely beautiful, impenetrable fob, this forward operating base, wonderful, but if we don't have any it takes all of our manpower to support that fob, we can't go outside the wire where the real fight is. We can't actually take the fight to the enemy. And the same thing with our finances. We need to choose our housing wisely, and I give some ratios as to what is appropriate in there. I talk about investing not only our income towards things like 401ks and that kind of thing, but also investing in ourselves, as I mentioned a moment ago. Different insurance that we need to protect ourselves with, life insurance, health insurance, disability, and those kinds of things. And that oftentimes those are every bit as important as whether or not you can pick a hot stock and those kinds of things. In fact, far more important. Having an estate plan. Those of us in the military, we always had the benefit of having the JAGs help us with that. But a lot of times when we leave the service, we don't go and maintain that, or we never touch it from the time we left the service. And then since then, we've had kids, family situations and dynamics have changed. So making sure that we always keep that up to date. And then actually having a plan for each objective that we're trying to achieve, whether that's going back to school that Kelly talked about. It's much easier to accomplish. I think you might agree if you have a plan, and that plan can change when the bullets fly, as they say, right? But going in without a plan, it makes you much less likely to succeed. It is the same thing with our financial goals. So actually writing them down and having a plan and making sure that that plan goes back up to the top and supports your why and supports what you're fighting for. And then finally, taking action. All of this is for naught if we don't develop that game plan and then say, okay, this is what we said we were going to try to do. Now let's take that first step, no matter how hard it might be. Now let's take that second step. And over time, just the act of doing that builds the discipline. It builds initially the discipline and then later on the habit to make those things a regular part of our day. And the example I use on that is a lot of times people say, oh, it's just so hard to have the discipline to save every month. Well, how many people here find it difficult to have the discipline to brush your teeth every day? Anybody? No, because it's a habit. Now maybe when you were 3 years old, your parents had to, like we're trying to do with my little 2-year-old, enforce that every single day. But once something becomes a habit, it no longer takes discipline. So if you can put these principles in place and you can do it over a course of, let's say, 6 months to a year, once you've done that, now you actually have a habit and it no longer takes the discipline. So those are the 10 principles of combat finance and things that I think will help set people up for success. And now I want to just talk about really quickly in my closing comments is that when we do that, for me, the why is doing these things, while it does require a little bit of self-sacrifice today, I'm putting forth dollars that could be spent for current use. It also gave me the financial freedom to be able to accomplish some of the whys, to have some of those great things and I think in an even bigger sense than the pink monkey and the liter cola to remember, and that's this. Because by the time I went to Afghanistan in 2009, 2010, I'd been living these principles. In fact, the one story I like to, that I like to talk about in the book, and I'm very proud of, is I always looked at the National Guard as a true second job. So I was always either working at the Nugget or in my professional career once I graduated college as my main source of income. So I always looked at the Guard as, hey, I'm going to get my educational benefits out of there, but it's a second income. So I have, well, I shouldn't say never once. I drew from my Guard checks one time, and that was to buy my wife's wedding ring. The rest of the 23 years that I served in the Guard, every single dollar I earned from the Guard went into my investment account and compounded out. So by the time I got to 2009, I was in a financial position that when I saw an opportunity to help, I could do that. And the opportunity was this. We had a young interpreter named Zabitullah Emil. Really smart guy, just impressed the heck out of me. He was just one of the guys that would come in and talk to me every single morning and ask what we needed, and just, you didn't have to go chase him down in the hooch trying to find him like you did with a lot of the other interpreters and that kind of thing. And so I assigned him to be my commander's interpreter, and I told him, I said, come on, this is a big deal for me, this is my commander, I really need to take care of him, don't ever let me down. And so from that day, he was 15 minutes before any mission, he was in my office. Okay, what do I need? Because we couldn't actually tell him what the missions were ahead of time and that kind of thing. Just impressed the heck out of me. So about midway through our deployment, I said, what's in your future? What do you want to do? And Emil had lost his father to fighting. He was born in 1989. And that was sort of the end of the fighting with the Russians, but before the Taliban took place. His father was lost in that fighting. His uncles took care of him until he was an adult, which for them was about 15, and then he needed to provide for his mom and sister. And he said, well, I wanted to go to school, but I needed to immediately start earning some money for my family. And I said, you're one of the brightest guys I know. If I was able to get you acceptance into the greatest university in the world, would you want to attend? And he said, yes, but what university is that? And I said, well, it's University of Nevada, Reno. And I said, in fact, there are schools out there that have symbols like a duck or a tree, but the University of Nevada, Reno's symbol is a wolf, strength. And he said, oh, that's great. So we worked with Karina Black and a couple of folks up at UNR and got him accepted. He was able to come to Reno. I told him if you could do a degree in 4 years, you got to keep a C average or above. You can live in our house, don't get in any trouble. If you follow these rules, we'll keep figuring out a way to get you paid. And through the local Rotary clubs, my mom's local Seroptimus club and other groups, we were able to get him through UNR. He held up his end of the deal, we held up ours. He graduated from University of Nevada, Reno about 3 years ago. He was accepted to the Rotary International Peace Fellowship. So he went over to Bradford, England and got a degree, a master's degree in conflict resolution through Rotary International and received that Peace Fellowship. During that time, there was a young lady that his mother and another family member he had seen at a wedding, and they had been secretly conversing via phone and computer. She was able to come over. They are now married, and she is at UNR in her junior year, has won International Student of the Month 3 times in her 3-year career there. So I now, because of the financial stewardship, that going back to that why, I had the ability to make a promise to a young man that I couldn't have done if I didn't have that monetary capital, that physical capital, and the intellectual capital to have the income to be able to make that promise. I just couldn't have done it. So my point with all of this is, we don't, at least in my mind, the why shouldn't be so I can be richer than my neighbor, so that I can show off to my high school friends or whatever. The why is when we have those resources, we can become more of what we want to be. In the words of another, I'm plagiarizing all kinds of folks here. There's an author out there and he talks about building your resume versus, building your obituary versus building your resume. So the why should be, what do we want to be remembered for in that obituary? Because it's not going to be that we made more than our next door neighbor. It's not going to be that, oh, well, he was the biggest producer in the branch or those kinds of things. It's going to be the people that we really made an impact on. What do our children think of us? Are we their first call when they need us? What do our family and the people who have known us for the longest time think of us? What do our fellow veterans think of us, and do we help when we could? So I want to leave you with that thought that financial stewardship is about bettering your life. It is about making you more productive, but it's also about taking that and supporting your why to write your obituary versus the resume. Thank you.